Hello my fellow flowers and welcome back to another video. I'm August, and if you're new here, feel free to stick around. We do a lot of crafting and, well, really just whatever I want because it's my channel. So today we are going to be making some reusable cloth pads. I think that they are a great alternative to the normal pads. They will save you money in the long run, you know, because you aren't constantly buying new pads, and they're better for the environment because a lot of the pads are made with plastics. Also, you throw them away each time, whereas these ones, you keep using them. And in general, I have found that they are more comfortable because it's just a soft fabric, so it's pretty similar to having, you know, just your normal underwear on, rather than like a weird pad thing. I don't know. Whatever. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our pattern. For the entire process, what we'll need is some outer fabric, some inner fabric, thread, some buttons or some sort of clasp. So these are these little buttons, but if you had like buttons that you have to have a buttonhole, I guess that would work, but just not as well. I hope you know what I mean. So I have those buttons. We're going to be using a pair of underwears for reference, and we're going to be using some construction paper. I just find it's easier to work with like a thicker paper, and then I have a ruler and a pen here as well. So we're going to be making our own patterns because, one, I want it to be the personal size and preference and everything that you want, and if I just gave you the pattern that I use, it won't necessarily be applicable to your situation because I'm small and a lot of people are not as small as I am. And you also will have different preferences. Maybe you want just like a really small pad that's like not noticeable or something. I don't know. Maybe you just want like a giant ass pad that like is just covering the whole area. I don't know. Whatever. You make it how you want. So the different fabrics that we're going to use, I feel like this is kind of important to talk about. I have this fabric. It's a lot thicker. It's very soft. This is my absorbing fabric. So what you'd want to use is probably more of like a fleece or something. It's kind of nice to use a nice cotton one and not have a synthetic right up in that area, but just something that's kind of more absorbent, but also like soft so that it's comfortable. And then your outside fabric. I always like to have like a cuter fabric as my outside fabric, even though you don't really like see it that much. Like, it's just attached to your underwear. But I like to use the cuter ones. I don't know, personal preference. So this is from a bed sheet. Very nice. To make the pattern, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our sheet of paper and we're going to fold it in half. I think that I don't need it that big, and I'll fold it in half this way so I can cut multiple things out of the same page. Otherwise, yeah, this should be fine. Probably, hopefully. I'm going to cut off this section of the paper here so that I then have space and I don't need to get another piece of paper. Okay, so I folded this one in half. Especially if you're a larger person, I recommend folding in half the long way, but this way I can get the two parts that I want to cut out from the same piece of paper, and I'm pretty sure this is as much space as I'm going to need. So I have two pieces that I folded in half, and I'm going to go ahead and fold them in half one more time. So it's folded in fourths. We folded it you know, like not on the same area. So it's like fold, and the point is here. So fold it in fourths. And then we're going to go ahead and measure the distance across the underwear. So the part that goes right across the area, this part, measure this is what we want to measure. That's the first thing that we're going to do. Kind of a big ruler, but fine. So I have 2 inches. This is folded in fourths, so I only need to draw an inch over. So I'm going to draw an inch over from the center, and I'm going to make a little mark of where the inch is. Boop. Okay. But at the very center of our pattern piece, we're going to have little clasps that fold back over, and they're going to have to, one, go over the other side. So we're going to need it to be doubled, but they also need to overlap a little bit. So I'm going to just go ahead and use the full 3 inches so that we have a little bit of seam allowance, a little bit of space for the overlap so that we have a place that it can button and clasp, and then, you know, actually being able to fold over the front side and the back side of the underwears. Okay, so I do have the 1 inch area marked though. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 1 inch on the other side so that I can make a straight line that is 1 inch away from the center fold. Okay, so I have my line, and I'm going to go ahead and make like a little another line going from this 3 inch mark to this center fold. Not the center fold, to the line that we drew. And that's going to be the part that goes over and has the little clasp and everything. So it's just going to be a little bit of a triangle like that. You can have it go as high as you want. It doesn't matter too much. And then I'm going to go ahead and do one more thing where I round out this top edge so that it's not just a rectangle. I think it just looks nicer, and it looks more like the traditional pads that you're used to if you round it out and stuff. Okay, so this is it. So one thing to note is I drew it 1 inch over after measuring the 2 inches. This is not including seam allowance. So if I would like to include seam allowance, I'll have to go over a little bit more. Probably approximated a 1/4 inch here. And then I'm going to go ahead and smooth out my little like curvy bit there. So now I'm going to cut this out. And you're just cutting through all 4 layers of paper right now. And now if we unfold it, wow, that kind of looks like a pad, doesn't it? Amazing. So this is our pattern. And one thing that I figured out when making these is that it's kind of fun and cool and helpful if you make one end a little bit longer than the other, and that would be the front side. The front side will be the longer side. So then what you would do is, instead of having the points here and them equal, this side will be longer and this side will be shorter, and this could be done in either moving the clasp areas up or, well, down so that this area is small and this area is longer, or you can just add space to this side if you just want it to be a little bit bigger than it was before. So let's see, this one is about, oh, obviously, 8.5 inches. because that's the size of the piece of paper I used, and I just kind of used the full paper. So that one's about 8.5 inches. I think that's about the size that I've been making them, but some problems that I've heard that people supposedly have with these, I don't really tend to have these issues. It might just be because I'm small. But some of the problems that I've heard of are that people have it in position and where they like it and everything, and then it'll slide. So that's part of the reason you might want to have more space in the top, because then if it does slide back, you're still more covered. The other thing that you can do to prevent the sliding is to understand the area that is the smallest and how much of that area there is. So if you make your points a lot like wider, you know, if you had like this versus this, then your wider points would, you know, prevent it from being able to slide. So those are some things to take into consideration when making your pattern. But we also still have this one. So on this one, we're gonna do basically the same thing. We're gonna fold it in fourths. And this time, instead of measuring over an inch on either side, I'm actually gonna just measure here because this is so big. We're gonna measure over almost an inch, since an inch is what we used. We're going to use almost an inch this time. And we're going to go ahead and connect that line, make it all straight. And we're going to do the same thing about rounding out, but this time we're going to go down a little bit. So like, let's completely remove this little top portion from the conversation, and then I'll round it out from there. And now I'm going to cut this piece out. So this is your like middle absorbent bit of the pad. So now you have two pieces. And what you can do is you can just ignore this piece and only use this piece, cut out one of the absorbent fabric and one of the other fabric, you know, right sides together, sew it, flip it inside out, you know, leave a space. Works best to leave like this space because it's a nice flat edge, so when you fold it back in it works easier to stitch it down. And call it a day. You can do that. But that's not very thick and it won't last you very long. You're going to have to like switch it out pretty often. So what I like to do is I like to add a little extra bit, and that, you know, just adds more absorbent fabric to the mix. Now, of course, what you could do is you could just cut out a bunch of these, stack them all up and stitch them all together. But the thing is, when you have all these edges here, and then you're trying to fold it inside out, and then it's all bulky, and it doesn't want to do what you want it to do, and it's like obnoxious, this is a lot easier. And when you're cutting out the fact that you have this little flappy bit, all it has to do is clasp, right? You don't need the super absorbent fabric right there. You do have some of it, so it's not like you'll get a ton of like leak or anything. But again, it's just so much more bulky. So when you add just the little strip bit in the middle, and then you can even like stitch it around and it can look good. I think that it's cute when it's top stitched in, but one option is to cut out 2 of these in your absorbent fabric, and then however many of these you want. I wouldn't go more than 3 if you cut out 2. And then one of these you sew to this one, or like all of these you sew to this one, and then you sew this one and the other one down so that you don't see the like little outline. It's an option. Especially as I said it, it sounded kind of dumb. I tried that method and it's just so extra, and it still does move around a little bit, you know, like inside, If that makes any sense. So when it's stitched all the way around, you know, you don't have the fabric inside moving around. That's obnoxious. It's just like, why? So we have our 2 pattern pieces, and I talked for a really long time about the pattern pieces, but you know, I hope that they're simple to make. Fold it in fourths, draw a few measurements, and round out the corners. That's all I did. And I recapped that very simply, but it is important to note that you do have seam allowance. So add a little bit of space to allow for the fact that you are going to be putting the seams together and you're not just going to have those seams exposed. So it's like, you know, removing fabric from the situation when you incorporate the seam allowances. So I'm going to move. There we go. This is the caps of the pen. Oh, I probably do need that pen if I'm going to be cutting these out. So when you're tracing onto your fabric, what you can do is you can use like a chalk or a special pen or marker for your fabric that washes off, but you could always place it marker side to like back side, you know, so that you don't see it, and it's going to be hiding in the seam allowance anyways. So I don't really care too much about just drawing on the fabric because I just want to make the thing. And it's just going in my underwear, so it's not a huge deal to me. So you start by tracing your pieces. Oh, I'm running low on fabric here. Let's see if I can make this fit. So I'm just going to be using the black thread that I already have on here because I don't like changing out thread. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 2 pieces of the middle bit and I'm going to, you know, line them up. And then I'm going to put them on one of these and stitch all the way around. And of course, just like the fraying edges, it doesn't matter a ton if you don't go back and forth on the edges here, but oh my gosh, my string is not properly adjusted. But as far as going back and forth on the edges so that you like stitch down the thread, backstitch, that's the word, backstitch. As far as backstitching goes, it's not like absolutely necessary, but please do it, please. Okay, so now that I have both my pieces stitched down onto the larger piece, I just need to sew them right sides together, and well, like this. And I'm gonna go around the edge, trim off extra fabric, you know, clip the little corners and edges and stuff, and turn it inside out, and then top stitch the edge down, and then hand sew the little buttons on. That's all. Basically done. Now I prefer to sew it down with this fabric down because this fabric gives me a lot of trouble. It's very slidey, but that makes it a little bit harder to see what's going on. So, you know, it's totally up to you and whatever's easiest for you to do. Okay, yeah, so the weird stitching is not as noticeably terrible on this one, so I'm going to continue with this. Oh, I missed a whole little section right there. I got to go back over and fix that one. Yeah, stitching it upside down the way that it's harder to see worked better, but the whole harder to see thing did catch up with me. But yeah, so what you would do if you had a sewing machine that was agreeing with you, or you were hand stitching this, is we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim off all the little excess bits, and we're going to snip in the corners. Snip, so then your corner can fold and bend more easily, so that when you like turn it inside out, you can turn the corners nicely. So we're going to go ahead and trim all of these edges, again, so that when you turn it inside out, it's not as bulky and it turns nicely. And so for this part where you haven't stitched it together yet, I like to leave it long and not trim it, because it just gives you more of the ability to, you know, get it right. But I do still trim in that corner a little bit so that, again, it turns nicely. Make sure not to trim like too close, because you don't want to let the fabric out, let it sneak out like it's not supposed to. So we've trimmed up all of the edges and made sure it was stitched nice and tight. So we're gonna go ahead and turn it inside out with this nice big area that we got here to be able to turn. You know, you don't have to leave a space that big to be able to turn it inside out. Obviously, the smaller the space, the nicer the final product probably will end up looking, because you don't have to like top stitch so much. You could hand finish it if you really cared, but you know, in the end, it is something that is going in your underwear. So I'm kind of just working out this corner here, and then also working just all of this out. But other than that, yep, this is it. And so then we'll take this edge, and I just like to kind of push it in with my fingers, like just push it down, and then just top stitch over that whole edge there. You can use pins or something to hold it and help you hold it, but it's such a small edge that I find that difficult to do anyways. And then I'm going to be stitching as close to the edge as I can, because again, it's a really small edge and I want to make sure that I'm top stitching down the edge that we're folding over. Okay, after I top stitch down the edge, what I like to do is, if we pretend this is the one that I have down here, is I like to continue on and stitch a triangle to help hold this down and keep everything nice and tight and not move around so easily, and it's nicer. That's what I like to do. I'm going to trim off the strings, and then I'm going to go back in and do the other triangle. Okay, so I trimmed off all of the little loose threads, and I have the little triangle sewn down. It just makes it easier to also fold in so they can overlap and clasp. I actually just thought of one of the coolest clasp ideas. So you know when you get an electronic thing or like a fancy thing or whatever, and it like magnets itself shut, it's like snaps shut, and like the little box does or whatever. What if you took out those little magnets when you were recycling the box, and you just use those as your little clasp? That would be really awesome. I would definitely try that. So anyways, yeah, I'm just gonna hand sew on one of these. I like to pick one that's a little bit on the larger side. I think size 3 is what I'm looking at. I don't even know. I have no idea. Now this would be a little excessive in my opinion, but you totally could. But I just end up going in and hand sewing this little guy on to either side. So when you're hand sewing it on, it is important to remember that one will be on the one side, and then one will be on the like absorbent side, so that when they fold over, this one will connect with the one right here, like that. But I don't feel like hand sewing today because I've already had a long day. I work full days, so I'm not going to do that right now. But I hope that you actually do it when you finish sewing yours, because otherwise it's kind of useless until you do. Enjoy! I hope your project works out great for you. If you have tried these reusable pads, or not like these ones, if you've tried reusable pads and you like them, please let me know. And if you haven't tried them, go ahead and make your own. I mean, I was looking at just investing in some, buying some, and testing it out and deciding if I liked it or not. And then I realized that I have so much fabric laying around that I totally could just make my own and test it out and decide if I like it or not, instead of spending the money. They are a little bit spendier than, you know, normal pads, but again, it's like an investment because you use them multiple times instead of the once and stuff. whatever. But you know, if you already have the materials lying around, or you can get them really cheap, like I fabric shop at the thrift store a lot, anything like that, then you know, go for it and give it a try and let me know how it goes.
Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more, and remember to like this video if you enjoyed it. I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.